Now going to public meeting, item number 1, application for certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, docket number 12-7519, block 1459, lot 22, 429 East 64th Street, City and Suburban Home Company, First Avenue Estate, an individual landmark, 2 6-story apartment buildings designed by Philip H. Ohm and built as part of the model tenement complex City and Suburban Homes First Avenue Estates in 1914 to 1915 and altered in 2006. This is an application to demolish the buildings pursuant to the rules of the City of New York 25-309 on the grounds that they generate an insufficient economic return. This was initially presented on January 24th, 2012 and last presented on October 29th, 2013.
Me first? Right, yeah.
Should we wait till Michael?
Yeah, let's hold on a sec till the two. And in fact,
Okay. So should we take a couple minutes break?
2 minutes.
Okay, 2 minutes.
Good morning, Commissioners. William Neely with the Landmarks Preservation Commission staff. This is an application by the owners of City and Suburban Complex to demolish the 2 easternmost buildings, 429 East 64th Street and 430 East 61st, 5th Street, located on York Avenue on the grounds of insufficient return. We've distributed some materials this morning, including another copy of staff's original handout to you, which will orient you to the site and remind you of the existing and historic condition of the building's facades. First public hearing was in January of 2012. Subsequently, the applicant made additional submissions to the Commission in response to public testimony and your questions, copies of which were distributed to you at the time they were submitted, and which was summarized and discussed at the public meeting of June 11th, 2013. There was a third public hearing on October 29th, 2013. Finally, there have been various communications and submissions in response to questions since that time, copies of which were forwarded to you. Mark Silverman, LTC Counsel, summarized the staff's subsequent actions on this application and start off today's discussion.
Thank you, Bill. Commissioners, I'm going to summarize a draft of a resolution. As you know, we've been circulating a draft resolution for the last 2 weeks. Yesterday, I circulated the most recent draft. I just want to remind everybody to please, we have court reporters here, and would you please speak in the mic and slowly if they can, and that includes reminding me to do the same. The application before you, as Bill said, seeks a finding of hardship to allow the owner to demolish 429 East 64th and 430 East 65th Street, the last buildings constructed as part of the City and Suburban First Avenue Estate. The applicant concedes that demolition of these buildings would be inappropriate under the Commission's appropriateness standards and seeks to demolish them pursuant to a finding of insufficient return. The applicant desires to demolish the buildings and to construct a new development on the site. It has asserted that if granted, it is prepared to follow all legal requirements to vacate the building, including offering tenants an equivalent apartment in the other buildings in the complex, and demolish the building expeditiously. The hardship test, as defined in Section 25309 of the Administrative Code, requires that the applicant establish to the satisfaction of the Commission that the improvement parcel that contains the designated structures cannot earn a reasonable return. A reasonable return is a net operating profit that is equal to or exceeds 6% of the assessed value of the improvement parcel. The hardship test allows various expenses, but does not include other costs, such as mortgage interest and amortization, in the calculus. In applying this test, the Commission was guided by the last hardship application it decided, the Kiska decision in 1989. In applying the hardship test to the application before you, we need to take into account the fact that the owner of the property began to warehouse apartments in pursuit of its development plans before the Commission designated the buildings in November of 2006. At the time of designation, there were 53 vacant apartments out of a total of 190 in the 2 buildings. Notwithstanding the designation, the owner continued to warehouse apartments as they became empty, and while it unsuccessfully challenged the designation in court, and after it began to prepare for this hardship application. Consequently, at the time the application was filed, there were 107 vacant apartments. There are currently at least 110 vacancies. In determining whether the buildings and improvement parcel can make a reasonable return, the applicant submitted development scenarios involving renovation of vacant apartments and re-renting them. The rental income from these renovated apartments, plus occupied apartments, plus other income generated by the property and other assets, is integral to determining the application. Because of the ever-changing number of vacancies, the applicant has since approximately May of 2010 based its economic analyses on 97 vacant apartments and 93 occupied apartments. The applicant submitted 4 basic renovation scenarios: the base building and apartment scenarios, the apartments-only scenario, the minimum habitability scenario, and the elevator scenario. It also submitted analyses for certain of these scenarios with varying different assumptions. In analyzing these scenarios, there are a number of discrete issues that have to be determined. First, what rents can renovated apartments generate? That question is also limited by the reality that these are rent-stabilized and rent-controlled units. Second, what is the appropriate level of vacancy and collection loss that should be deducted? Third, does or could the improvement parcel generate other sources of income, for example, by building storage facilities or through the sale of development rights? Fourth, what will the post-renovation operating expenses be? Fifth, what is the proper amount for depreciation? Sixth, what will be the projected real estate taxes? There's also the question about whether and how projected soft costs should be considered in the analysis. Finally, there's the question of projecting the post-renovation assessed value of the improvement parcel, against which the 6% return will be compared. As a threshold matter, the question arises whether the improvement parcel for this application should be just Lot 22, as argued by the applicant, or should be all of Block 1459, which comprises the entire City and Suburban complex. In considering this issue, it should be noted that the subject buildings are part of a historic housing complex with a shared history and shared development. It appears that the division of the tax block into 4 lots is the historic condition. They share common mechanical plant with the other buildings, share maintenance and other labor costs, and share an on-site rental office. In addition, between at least 2008 and 2012, the owner filed consolidated tax filings for all the lots on Block 1459, as well as the stall-owned building that comprises the entire block facing York Avenue directly across East 65th Street. The owner has opposed this interpretation, declined to provide some information on the rest of the complex on the grounds that it is irrelevant to this proceeding. Given the factors discussed above, the draft resolution circulated to you concludes that Block 1459 and not just Lot 22 is the proper improvement parcel under the Landmarks Law. On this ground alone, the application can be denied. Nevertheless, the Commission did a full analysis of the hardship application, presuming that the improvement parcel is just Lot 22 as proposed by the owner. As another threshold matter, the resolution proposes that the owner's decision to continue to vacate apartments after designation constituted a conscious business risk, and the cost to renovate these apartments are therefore a self-imposed hardship and should not be taken into account for purposes of depreciation and for some projections of post-renovation assessed value using the cost approach. More on that later. Finally, as another threshold matter, the resolution focuses on the apartments only and minimum habitability scenarios. Moving to the discrete issues listed above, the resolution proposes to agree with the applicant that the apartments only scenario could generate rents equal to $35 a square foot in rent. However, in addition, based mostly on an analysis of apartments in the other buildings that were being rented, based on mostly on what apartments in the other buildings were being rented for, the resolution concludes that the apartments only scenario could generate rents equal to $40 a square foot or higher. The basis for this conclusion includes the high rent per square foot attained in the other buildings and the fact that preferential rents weren't required for rents below $1,200 a month. The resolution concludes that renovated apartments in the subject building will be as nice, if not nicer, than apartments in the other buildings. In terms of finishes, they are generally similar in size to many apartments in the other buildings, and that their location on York Avenue does not make them materially less desirable than other apartments in the complex. Other data provided by Cushman about rents for small apartments in other allegedly comparable buildings supports this conclusion. Moreover, rents at the subject buildings include heat and electricity and don't require a broker's fee, something that makes them even more attractive and less expensive when compared to apartments in other buildings. With respect to the minimum habitability scenario, the resolution proposes a finding that the record does not support the applicant's conclusion that they could rent for only slightly more than $600 a month, and they could command at least $869 a month, which is the average rent for occupied apartments in the subject building. The resolution notes that in no instance was a preferential rent required to rent an apartment in the other buildings for less than $1,200, which implies that rents below that amount are usually the result of legal rent limits and not what rents could obtain if renovations allowed the rents to be increased to that level. As to the vacancy and collection loss factor, the resolution proposes a finding that the record does not support using the applicant's projected 10% vacancy and loss factor. This is significantly higher than the average for the area, which peaked at slightly less than 5% in 2009, and that's for both vacancy and collection loss. The area's average vacancy rate for the 5 years surrounding 2009 was 1.5%, and the highest vacancy rate was just under 2.5 in 2009. To the extent it is based on the applicant's testimony that the other buildings have a vacancy rate that exceeds 20%, the resolution notes that the owner has not acted rationally, prudently, or efficiently in seeking to reduce this alleged vacancy in the other buildings. Notwithstanding the alleged high vacancy rate, the owner testified it had done nothing to better market the apartments, such as listing in different media and with brokers, or making changes to make them more desirable, such as building storage. The resolution also proposes an inference that the owner has consciously kept apartments in the other buildings off the market as part of its plan to develop the subject building, as it needs to be able to offer relocation assistance to rent-stabilized tenants in the subject buildings. For these reasons, the applicant has not demonstrated that average vacancy and collection loss factors for the area shouldn't apply. The resolution also proposes a finding that the applicant has not demonstrated that the improvement parcel cannot generate other income, in addition to the $12,500 in miscellaneous income recognized by Cushman. First, the resolution proposes to include approximately $12,000 in assigned income from laundry facilities located in other buildings, in accordance with the historic practice of the owner's accountants. The fact that this income is not a right under a lease should not prevent this assignment from continuing for purposes of the hardship analysis, especially as the owner's consultant noted that laundry facilities in the complex are deemed an amenity. The resolution also proposes a finding that the applicant has not adequately explored other ways to generate income from the property, including building storage facilities in the basement and renting roofs to cell phone companies. The commission asked the applicant to look at building storage facilities, but the applicant simply stated that it was not economical. Given that the apartments are not large, the applicant should have more thoroughly explored this option. Significantly, the resolution notes that the unused development rights on the improvement parcel have some value, as they could theoretically be transferred by special permit to the stall-owned site adjacent to the subject buildings or to Rockefeller University. The applicant's argument that there's no receiving site is not credible, given the stall owns this adjacent building, which is not landmarked. The fact that there are rent-stabilized or controlled tenants does not render the development rights worthless, as proposed by the applicant. The resolution does not support the applicant's projection of post-renovation operating costs that are more than 50% greater than the average operating costs for the rest of the complex. The subject buildings had their facade redone just prior to designation in an effort to stave off designation, and well over half the apartments will be renovated under all of these development scenarios. Thus, there's no justification for such a high estimate. Instead, the resolution proposes to increase the average operating costs by 15% over the average operating cost of the other buildings to account for alleged but not specified inferior conditions at the subject buildings. Depreciation. As discussed above, the resolution does not support allowing the applicant to depreciate the cost of alleviating the self-imposed hardship of renovating the 44 apartments vacated after designation. Therefore, the depreciation will include only the cost of renovating 53 apartments, as well as certain window work in the apartments only scenario. Included in these expenses is a 15% contingency, as well as 22% for soft costs. The applicant has argued for a soft cost percentage of 32%. Approximately a third of that is interest on the construction loan. As mentioned above, the hardship provisions exclude mortgage interest from the reasonable return calculations. In Kiska, soft cost did not include loan interest, although mortgage recording tax was included. Therefore, interest has been excluded from the soft costs, but all other loan-related costs are included. The last two items are related, projecting the future real estate assessment after renovation and the real estate taxes after renovation. There are two approaches to projecting assessed value, the income approach and the cost approach. The applicant has argued for using the cost approach because it's more fair, because it explicitly factors in the cost of renovation, and because it asserts the commission utilized this approach in Kiska. The Department of Finance submitted a letter stating that it uses the income approach. While the applicant's attorneys challenged this statement, the resolution proposes adopting the income approach as advocated by the Department of Finance. Furthermore, the resolution notes that the commission did not use the cost approach in Kiska when projecting the future assessment for development scenarios involving rental properties as opposed to sales scenarios. The cost approach was used when the development scenarios involve the sale of a building, as investors would have to recoup these costs at the point of sale. However, returns on investment in rental properties occur over time by efficient operating costs and the lowest possible real estate tax, with respect to, among other factors. With respect to projecting future real estate taxes, the resolution proposes to base the projection on the income approach as detailed by the Department of Finance. The owner has proposed projecting real estate taxes as 25% of effective gross income. However, there's no actual relationship between effective gross income and real estate taxes. In addition, the Department of Finance submitted a statement that it only uses the income approach in valuing income-producing properties. Therefore, the record supports using the income approach to project future taxes. While this varies from the approach in Kiska, the resolution notes that if one did project real estate taxes using the cost approach, it would result in a substantially higher tax equal to approximately 35% of effective gross income, or more than 40% higher than proposed by the applicant. Clearly, a reasonable and prudent owner would want to pay as little in real estate tax as possible. For this reason, the record supports using the income approach to project future taxes. Therefore, in summary, the draft resolution considers the apartments only and the minimum habitability scenarios with the following factors: that the apartment only scenario can generate rents of at least $35 a square foot and go as high as $40 a square foot, if not more, and that the minimal habitability scenario can generate rents of at least $869 a month or slightly more than $28 a square foot. That a 5% vacancy and collection loss should be subtracted from the rent roll. That $12,000 in income from laundry should be included in the income. That operating costs after renovation should be 15% higher than the average for the other buildings in the complex. That the cost of renovating 44 apartments vacated after designation is a self-created hardship and should not be included in the depreciation allowance. That a 15% contingency and 22% soft costs will be included. That the post-renovation real property assessment should be projected using the income approach, and that future real estate taxes should also be projected using the income approach. However, in addition, we consider a fourth analysis whereby 53 apartments were renovated pursuant to the cost of the apartments only scenario, and the other 44 were renovated in the lesser minimal habitability standards, and that was done on the theory that the applicants might say, if we can't get the cost of renovating the 44 apartments depreciated or included, we would do them at a lesser level. So we looked at that as well. In addition, however, the Commission also considered all these analyses with a 20% higher than average operating cost factor and soft cost of 32% as requested by the applicant. Finally, the resolution also compares all of the outcomes to a post-renovation assessed value based on the cost approach as advocated by the applicant. The resolution applied the cost approach using the cost of renovating 53 apartments and 97 apartments. In all of these scenarios, the rate of return exceeded 6% of the assessed value after renovation. So that's my
Okay.
summary.
Okay. Believe it or not, that was a concise summary. That truly is a superb summary of a demonstrably complex case. And hardship cases that come before this commission are rare, but they demand the kind of attention and care and sifting of facts and assertions and law that we have brought to bear superbly, in my judgment, with the staff of this commission and the counsel to this commission over the last 2.5 years or 3.5 years, however you measure it, but the first hearing being back in January of 2012. So without going over each and every detail that Mark has just described, let me jump to my own view of this, my summary of some of the salient facts, and I've reviewed not only the record in this case, I've sat through the hearings, of course, and demanded our attention, and the draft resolution that's been alluded to here, and I've thought, as we all have, about all the aspects of this case and this application. And I find that the owner here has not carried its burden of demonstrating to the satisfaction of this chairman of this commission, and I believe, I hope that the full commission, that the property cannot earn a reasonable return under the landmarks law, not met that burden. Before I get to that substance, we have been considering it, I've already talked about that. Let me go to the threshold issue, which I believe that the proper improvement parcel for this hardship is all of block 1459, not just lot 22, as the applicant has argued. I think the record's clear that the ownership has operated the entire block as a single integrated unit with shared mechanical system, maintenance, rental services, and it appears that ownership, the applicant, has voluntarily sought to file all of the lots on block 1459 as well as the adjacent lot 22 on block 1460, which it also owns, for consolidated consideration in an effort to reduce real estate taxes, and has ownership, as the ownership has refused to provide information, has not provided information with respect to the entire complex. I find they have not, that's another reason they have not carried their burden under the hardship provision. My conclusion doesn't change, though, even if we assume that only lot 22, on which the two subject buildings sit, is the improvement parcel in question. Even under that rubric, that test, that set of facts, if you will, they still have not, in my judgment, demonstrated hardship. The task before us is to see if, under reasonably prudent management and efficient management, the properties can earn a net return of 6% of the assessed value of the property, as those terms are defined in the law. To do this analysis, we have considered different scenarios to renovate vacant apartments, bring them back online, and other things. It's complicated, of course, as the owner has legally begun the process of vacating the buildings. In fact, this process even began before they were designated, with the view to demolishing them and constructing a tall building. I'm not accusing, and I'm certainly or suggesting the owner of doing anything inappropriate or improper in that process, but just the facts as we have compiled them and as we understand them. At the time of designation, then, there were 53 vacant apartments out of the 190 in the buildings. The owner continued to vacate those apartments, such that at the time of the application that was filed here, that we're ruling on today, there were 107 vacant apartments. So for purposes of the various analyses, we're looking at renovating only 97 of the apartments, because that's the number used by the most recent economic analyses provided by the owner. So, however, as 44 of that 97 were vacated after designation, that in effect, my judgment, is a self-created hardship, and the cost of renovating them should not be included in depreciation. In a sense, they've tried to have it two different ways: warehousing the apartments in the subject buildings, not paying enough attention that the windows were broken, and turned it into a coop of sorts for pigeons, yet complaining what poor shape they were in and how much it would cost to fix them up. It can't be done. They made a calculated business decision that they would win the challenge to the designation at the time we considered the designation, but they lost that challenge, and this is the consequence that follows. This commission considered the apartments-only scenario and the minimum habitability scenario. In the former, the owner proposed to invest $52,000 on average to fix up each apartment. Cost was slightly lower for the minimum habitability scenario, which cost more than $41,000 on average. The question is, how much would these apartments rent for after this investment? And I happen to agree with Stahl that in the apartments-only scenario, apartments could generate $35 a square foot. But I think they would likely rent for more based on what the applicant here, the owner Stahl, has actually received for apartments during the relevant time period in the other buildings. While there may be some differences between the buildings and the apartments, the similarities outweigh these differences. They're all 6-story walk-ups, small apartments, minimal amenities, but they of course have wonderful designs and cross ventilation, light and air. So there are a lot of factors that go into the assessment, if you will, of these apartments. I think that these apartments, which will be substantially renovated and is not, if not nicer than apartments in the other building, then they would command, my sense is, they would command prices similar to what Stahl has gotten, which is at least $40, if not more, per square foot. I would also point out that these rents include heat and electricity, no broker's fee, and making them even more cheaper and even more attractive. As for the minimal habitability scenario, it belies my experience and as a New Yorker for 45 years or more, that the applicant could argue with a straight face that minimally renovated apartments could command a rent of slightly more than $600 a month. When I tell people that, they always say, give me 2 or maybe 3. And there is no support in the record or basically intuitively or in common sense for such a low rent for buildings in such a desirable location. So what could they rent for? Let's be sensible about it. Let's go to the real world. The average legal rent of vacant apartments is just over $1,000, as Mark has pointed out, $1,000 a month. The record shows that no apartment for that amount required a preferential rent. Nevertheless, to be conservative, our analysis assumes a rent of $869, still quite low, which is the average rent being paid for occupied apartments in the buildings. As for the vacancy rate, there too, I think the record doesn't support using anything but the average, less than 5% for vacancy and credit loss. Stahl has not shown that he's trying extremely hard to rent the apartments in the other buildings. There is something quite illogical about a landlord who claims to suffer from rents that are too low, yet doesn't make any effort to advertise or rent the apartments. This makes no sense on its face unless there is another motive, or another intention at work to use the buildings to facilitate other plans like development plans or other use of these buildings or this site. Additional income. I find that the owner has not demonstrated that the buildings cannot generate more revenue. If the apartments are too small, then provide or rent storage, as we've talked about. What about renting the roofs to cell phone companies? And I buy those. I adopt those arguments. I think they're important and valid. Most significantly, the unused development rights have some value. They're not worth zero, which is what has been claimed in the application. The owner here owns a full block site with a 6-story building directly across the street from the subject building. Surely that site has development potential, even if it may take some time. Final few points and get to the end here. With respect to the projecting post-renovation assessed value against which the important 6% return will be measured, I think that the record has adequately demonstrated that the Department of Finance has used the income approach when valuing rental buildings, and this is the most likely way the site would in fact be valued. While the applicant has labored hard to defend the cost approach, I note that the Commission didn't use it in Kiska, as Council has pointed out. I also note that it's essentially counterintuitive in this case. The applicant is asking us to use a method that will guarantee a high assessment, which in the normal course of things would generate very high real estate taxes. No sensible property owner wants to maximize their property taxes. As a result, the applicant is forced to ask that the cost approach be used to project assess value, but then proposes a completely arbitrary method for projecting real estate taxes to avoid being saddled with extraordinarily even high taxes. So I'm comfortable with, I think it makes sense. with the income approach, but I note that staff has also done the calculation for the cost approach for both 53 and 97 apartments as well, and they also show, in either case, that there's no hardship. So a little unbalanced, without restating any of it. You've heard it now, some of this twice, but they are salient points. It's important to my reasoning and our reasoning, and I believe that the burden has not been carried for a hardship. Marjorie?
Thank you. I've reviewed the draft hardship resolution that Mark Silberman read a synopsis of. The analysis there is thorough and addresses in detail the statutory findings for hardship under the Landmarks Law, as well as the application of the hardship test established in Kiska Developers, Inc. Given the complexity of that analysis, which looked at every one of Stahl's submissions over the 4 years that this application has dragged on, transcripts of all of the hearings, as well as written public testimony and materials provided by sister agencies, it is impossible for me to cover here all of the issues in any more than a very general manner. I do want to start off with the issue that weighs most heavily in this case, and a subject of which all of us have become extremely aware in the last few months, and that subject is affordable housing. The subject is both not a landmarks preservation issue and is one. Preservation is exactly that, the retention of existing structures to be used and renewed according to contemporary need and societal focus. Buildings of quality endure and neighborhoods change within and around them. Retained and reused historic structures have for literally thousands of years served the needs of generations of new users and occupants in cities around the world. During the 1990s, the focus of my architecture office's work, along with many other offices at the time, was the design and construction of affordable housing in the most neglected and decaying areas of the Bronx, Brooklyn, the Lower East Side, and Harlem. Nearly all of the housing that I worked on consisted of the renovation of railroad flat old law tenement buildings, the best of which resulted from the combination into a single building of adjacent tenements in order to improve interior layouts and access to street and yard views, since the long, narrow, old tenement plan relied to large extent on narrow light shafts for ventilation to the bedrooms. These renovated buildings provided excellent and modern studio 1, 2, and 3 bedroom apartments that served with style the needs of working families in the communities in which they were located. Furthermore, renovated tenements contributed to the renaissance of those once decrepit, now highly desirable neighborhoods. All of this is relevant to the instant application in many ways, the most important point of which is that the city and suburban new law tenement buildings, built around extremely large interior courtyards and providing every unit with at least 2 exposures to either a street or the enormous courtyard, are sun-drenched and airy, enjoying the benefits of cross-ventilation that rival and even surpass in quality the best pre-war luxury Park Avenue courtyard apartments. In fact, with their multiple exposures and windows in kitchens and bathrooms, the city and suburban units are better lit and ventilated than are many apartments being built today, where since at least 1968, building codes have permitted construction of windowless, mechanically ventilated bathrooms and kitchens. Stahl argues that the city and suburban buildings are walk-ups and the apartments are too small at 446 gross square feet, hence are undesirable and unrentable. Yet the city is filled with literally thousands of walk-ups in the form of row houses, brownstone, old and new law tenements, many of which are located in historic districts. Somehow, other landlords manage to rent these units and earn reasonable returns on their investments. As to size, many of these row house and tenement apartments are the same size, if not smaller, than the claimed average size of the subject building apartments. In 2013, the Bloomberg administration, through changes in legislation, enabled the development of the new micro unit that ranges in size from 250 to 370 square feet, aimed at providing affordable housing to singles. The city and suburban units are considerably larger than that. When I was preparing this, I was doing some research on the history of tenement renovation, and I found this excellent article from 1999 called the Making Tenements Modern. And in '99 was when I was working as a housing architect, and so was renovating apartments. So every single person mentioned in this article is a colleague, a property owner. Most notably, there was an interview of Robert Pearl, who is still the president of Tower Brokerage on East 10th Street, and the owner of many, many tenement buildings in the Lower East Side. And in '99, when the economy looked nothing as good as it looked in 2009, because that was sort of after a very huge recession and the market was just beginning to climb again. In 1999, Robert Pearl said that he had renovated 3 1880 tenements and he had upgraded half the 70 apartments over the last 6 years as tenants have moved and totally gutted, reconfigured, and re-equipped them once the very long-term occupancy of the prior tenant was vacated. He said that these apartments were designed for singles, and he said, typically, 2 singles with incomes of $30,000 to $50,000 a year rent 450 square feet of modern space with a full 3-piece bathroom, a sink, toilet, and either a tub with a shower or a shower stall, because these tenement buildings, of course, used to have tubs in the kitchen, and paying for them in 1999 on the Lower East Side, when that was not a chic and trendy place yet, $1,000 to $1,400 a month. So, going back. Today, as a land use lawyer, I shifted hats. I represent at least one very large national real estate investment trust company that entered the New York City market with the express purpose of acquiring fully tenanted tenement buildings for their upside potential. Many of these buildings contain rent control and stabilized units. In other words, given that real estate is for the long term, they see tenement buildings as profitable investments where, like Bob Pearl, as tenants move out, renovated apartments bring increased rents, as do the addition of new penthouse units on the top of them. Stahl's assertion that the city and suburban buildings will continue to be unprofitable whether or not individual apartments are renovated simply defies logic and runs counter to the practice of other experienced real property owners in the city. I also have significant experience with the piecemeal gut renovation of individual apartments within walk-up tenements, where construction workers easily address the removal of debris with chutes that drop directly into containers and delivery of material and equipment through street-facing windows with simple boom hoists that lift supplies through window openings. With a good crew, renovation of these units is rapid and efficient, completed in not more than 6 weeks, including DOB inspections. With limited disturbance to neighbors, apartments along a single or adjacent lines can be renovated simultaneously without the need to vacate occupied units along the same line. Stahl's assertion that such renovations would require relocation of tenants, installation of elevator hoistways, and 2 years' worth of building-wide vacancy is unsupported by industry practice. Stahl has submitted photographs of empty apartments in the building in an effort to persuade us that it is impossible to ameliorate with any significant impact the sad conditions depicted in the photographs. This is simply untrue. In the first place, on our visit to the occupied apartment of the building's current tenants, every apartment we visited proved Stahl's assertion false. These apartments are a delight, having been improved by the tenants themselves and filled with art, ingenious built-ins, furnishings, personality, and pride of place. This is true of the smallest apartments as well as the larger ones. In addition, as noted above, the empty units could be renovated. This is done every day of the week in the thousands of old and new law tenement buildings located throughout New York City. I fail to see why Stahl is unable to accomplish what so many other building owners have been doing for more than a century. Stahl implies that by being permitted to demolish these buildings and, in their ideal version, replace them with a new high-end luxury residential tower with sweeping views of the East River located just steps from elegant Sutton Place, they will be improving the city's housing stock. In fact, though, Stahl will be destroying and not replacing not less than 190 units of quality, affordable housing, including the 110 units that due to Stahl's warehousing that began in the 1990s, have been kept offline. Applying the standard 20% affordable expectation in a new development with the 80-20 kind of project, Stahl would have to construct 1,000 units of market rate housing on the site to retrieve the 190 lost by the proposed addition. I doubt seriously that the plan is to construct an as-of-right tower here with 1,200 units in it. In fact, since the project would require no special approvals from either city planning or the Board of Standards and Appeals, there would be no reason to expect any affordable housing at all to come out of this project. Stahl began taking these affordable housing units offline in the 1990s, with the majority being removed from the rental market after 2000. Stahl continued to do this after the buildings were designated in 2006 and now claims these vacancies as a hardship. As noted above, contrary to their claims, these units could have been renovated and rented. Consequently, the claimed vacancy and income hardship is self-imposed and should not be permitted. As concerns the specifics of this hardship application, the LPC has been reviewing Stahl submissions since 2010. By the terms of the Landmarks Law hardship statute, 2009 was, at the time of application, within the allowable time period to serve as the valuation test year for market rental values, vacancy rates, construction costs, income and expense projections. However, since October 2010, the date of the application, Stahl took 7 months and later more than 8 months to respond to the LPC's request for information. Other submissions also took several months between the request and delivery. Each submission contradicted the last and set up entirely new criteria for the analysis being dealt with in that submission. Now, nearly 4 years after the initial application and burdened by stacks of contradictory and confusing studies, the LPC is asked to consider the viability of the buildings based on 2009 economic conditions as described in the most recently revised version of the studies. Even if we were to ignore Stahl's seemingly intentional efforts to confuse the facts, there is no question that 2009 was a period of major economic downturn. The entire country was in recession, hence jobs were scarce, rents were lower, vacancies greater. Since 2012, however, New York City's economy has seen economic boom times, with rents rising astronomically, housing shortages, reduced unemployment, and higher incomes. It is nonsensical that LPC's review of the submission should be artificially restrained by 2009 data when the rate of return of investment in 2014 reality would show vacancy rates well below 2% and average apartment rentals for apartments of this type at more than $1,800 per month, if not more than that. By way of example, according to HPD's 2011 New York City Housing and Vacancy Survey, the 2011 Manhattan vacancy rate was 2.8%. Stahl has claimed that in 2009, the vacancy rate of the city and suburban complex was 5 to 7.5%. Even if those numbers were accurate, which for reasons stated below they cannot be, Stahl should not be rewarded for its failure to diligently prosecute the application and should be required, in my view, to prove that it cannot make a reasonable return on investment based on 2014 data, not 2009 data. Stahl has asked the Commission to ignore rental rates in its other buildings in the balance of the complex and to accept its estimate of vacancy rates that are significantly higher than the Manhattan average. With respect to the latter, it is clear from testimony and from my own experience that Stahl has intentionally avoided leasing apartments in the complex. No information on how to go about renting an apartment in the buildings is available on the internet unless one is aware that Greenthal Management manages them. The Greenthal Management website lists the location as Rock Properties without an address, indicating only that they are at 64th to 65th Street, 1st Avenue to York Avenue, without any further information other than a telephone number. When a colleague of mine called to ask about available one-bedrooms, he was told there were none, but to call back in a couple of months. Another colleague was unable to locate the rental office when she visited the buildings in person, because you have to know where to go. Stahl admits that it does not list the units with any rental agencies. Consequently, Stahl's claim vacancy rates are not credible, and Stahl's behavior with respect to lease-up and building management does not demonstrate that it operates the buildings under reasonably prudent and efficient management as required by the Landmarks Law's hardship statute. With respect to rental rates in the other buildings, Stahl's claim that the units in those buildings are not comparable to renovated units in the subject buildings is also not credible, as floor plans show that the unit layouts and unit mix in many of the other buildings in the complex are actually nearly identical to those in the subject buildings. Stahl has never claimed that it is unable to make a reasonable return on investment in the other buildings. Hence, it is impossible to comprehend how, with proper renovation of the units, equivalent rents to the neighbors, and improved rent-up techniques, they would not be able to make a reasonable return on investment in the subject buildings. The subject buildings sit on a zoning lot that encompasses the entirety of Block 1459. The eastern 100 feet by 200 feet of the block on which the subject buildings are located sit within an R10 zoning district. The R10 lines run from 100 feet in depth on both sides of York Avenue. 200,000 square feet could therefore be developed on the site under zoning. The buildings currently contain approximately 80,000 zoning square feet. Hence, 120,000 square feet are available to be used on the site itself or transferred across 65th or 64th Streets or across York Avenue to other development sites within the R10 zoning district pursuant to Section 74-79 of the zoning resolution. Stahl claims, without substantiation, that these sites would not be suitable receiving sites for these excess development rights, rejecting the idea of adding to its own property to the north of the site, in spite of the fact that it is common to construct enlargements on existing buildings, even tenanted ones. During discussions of the major renovation scenarios, Stahl did not consider the possibility of adding floors to the subject buildings or requesting relief from city planning or the BSA to be permitted to distribute the excess floor area over the other buildings in the complex, nor has it ever requested that the LPC consider such a proposal. There is currently also a proposal out there which has received general support in the real estate community to allow the excess floor area from individual landmarks to travel greater distances than are presently allowed under Section 7479 of the zoning resolution. Excess floor area development rights currently sell in the marketplace for $200 to $650, depending upon location. That potential income should be considered in this case. Almost there. The draft hardship resolution breaks down the analysis of achievable rent into square footage costs and is, in my view, an accurate compilation of the data presented. Simply applying knowledge and logic to the real estate and rental market in this domain, Stahl's claimed maximum rental values of $600 per month per apartment following the renovations of kitchens and bath is simply not credible, particularly in light of the much higher rents being achieved in the other buildings in the complex and the simple reality that the buildings are on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, surrounded by upscale communities and services. Likewise, Stahl's estimate of post-renovation maintenance costs is unreasonably high based on their claim that apartment-only renovations will leave the balance of the buildings in poor shape, hence requiring more intensive maintenance programs. This belies the facts. In an effort to thwart the landmarking of the buildings, in 2006, the owner completely stripped the buildings of their exterior ornamentation and stuccoed the masonry walls. With the renovation of the kitchens and baths in 97 apartments, cost estimates show that bathroom and kitchen fixtures will be replaced and would include rough-in. Other than the replacement of the main risers, this represents replacement of a significant portion of the plumbing. Likewise, by replacing the electrical panels in each unit, which is included in the renovation costs, outdated wiring will be, by code, need to be replaced as well. In addition to upgrading the units to meet or exceed the quality of the units in the other buildings, for which much higher rents were achieved, maintenance costs should, therefore, be significantly reduced. In conclusion, Stahl's drawn-out application, confusing and contradictory submissions, its neglectful management, and the data provided during this long review process has not persuaded me that 190 units, if properly renovated and maintained, would be sun-filled, 190 units of properly renovated and maintained, sun-filled, well-lit, affordable housing should be destroyed.
Michael. Thank you, Marjorie.
Well, let me first say that this wasn't a very complex, detailed. Let me first
Louder,
say
yep.
that this has been a very complex, detailed, technical application, and my response will not address anywhere near all of the aspects of it. I think that I can say that I agree with many of the things that have already been said by both Marjorie and by Bob, and certainly I think that the legal department's work on this has been prodigious, taking into account every challengeable assumption and giving it the benefit of the doubt, and still having the project come out as not meeting the hardship criterion. But let me start my testimony with a quote that could sound ripped from the headlines. Quote, "Private efforts had proven to be ineffectual given the magnitude of the housing problem, causing officials to argue for a major new initiative." But this paraphrase from Richard Plunz's History of Housing in New York describes the 1896 Improved Housing Conference, the ideological birthplace of the City and Suburban Homes Corporation. Its First Avenue estate, these buildings that we're talking about today, built to the most progressive standards of the day, elevated working-class housing to and sometimes beyond the standards of middle-class models, with ample light and air, on-site amenities, and enlightened apartment layouts. Its apartments are small, but efficient, practically designed, a fact we observed when we visited the homes of several longtime residents who have made lovely, comfortable homes in spaces that many would consider snug. Today we are asked to determine whether this landmark development can provide its owners with a return sufficient to justify its continued existence. Years of effort by the owners and their opponents have generated reams of testimony, scads of studies, piles of data. But it all boils down for me to the simple question. At a time of historically high occupancy rates, when an apartment in Manhattan is more valuable than ever, does this one complex possess such remarkable deficits that it cannot yield its owners a mere 6% return? In my view, the applicant has not made this case. I have read the draft resolution and agree with its detailed conclusions regarding this application. Time and again, the heaps of detail built confident conclusions on assumptions that to me seem incorrect. I think the applicant understood this dissonance between our innate sense of Manhattan real estate and their own conclusions in this case. The underlying premise of their case seems to be that the First Avenue estate so deeply defies Manhattan real estate norms that have driven our economy for decades and changed the face of this city for every one of its inhabitants, that it justifies their counterintuitive view of their building's value. This case hinges on two components: the cost of improving the units and the returns they will yield after renovation in the marketplace. Regarding the cost, the LPC staff has agreed with the applicant's scope of work and the renovation costs associated with it, producing renovated apartments in their existing configurations restored to a basic market standard. Nothing fancy, but clean, functional, and sturdy. My review of the applicant's documents, talking about the renovation costs, come up with numerous assertions that I disagree with. These disagreements relate not to the overall cost, but to the reductions in scope that they blame on cost that are later used to assert that the buildings will still yield a lower rent. Let me explain that a little bit. In other words, a lot of the assumptions that were built into the scenarios that were discussed here premise are premised on the fact that the cost of the renovations would be so high because of these exigent conditions special to the building that we can only do a little bit. We can't do the normal amount. And because we can only do a little bit, therefore, the buildings will be substandard even when we're done renovating them. And so it's that aspect of this portion of the application that I disagree with. Further, the overall renovation costs were exaggerated by the fact that some of the defects in the buildings are self-imposed, as we've discussed. Had their applicant not held about 50% of the buildings empty for decades, incremental maintenance would have addressed many of the repairs that are now needed. But this is not the core of the case. The buildings, even after the renovation, will, according to this application, still present to the market a substandard product, which will yield substandard returns. So how is the complex deficient? The applicant puts forward two main reasons. First, the location on First Avenue is too far east from amenities and transit, and second, the apartments are too small and the buildings are undesirable. The location argument is ludicrous. Greenpoint, Red Hook, Williamsburg, Sutton Place, Jackson Heights, Throgs Neck, Staten Island. The list of fine neighborhoods further from transit than this site, with perfectly adequate rents, goes on and on and on. This location, right across from a major hospital and research university, in fact gives the site considerable added value. And when the 2nd Avenue subway opens up, this value will only increase substantially. The complex's condition is far better than many I have seen, certainly no worse than many other buildings of a similar vintage, virtually all of them occupied at strong rents. This is borne out by a careful examination of the comps. The applicant had to resort to housing authority apartments to find rents comparable to the applicant's projected rent here. Even if the renovated units remained under rent regulation, the significant capital improvements to be made should allow for their rent to rise sufficiently to provide solid returns. The apartments themselves are small, but are well laid out and efficient. The many residents whose homes we visited were comfortable, livable, and quite reasonable. In fact, the 446 gross square foot average unit size remains a feature that the city now fosters, as Marjorie noted, with the ADAPT NYC competition. Granted, those will have elevators and cool built-in gizmos and Murphy beds, but they will lack cross-ventilation, the convivial common courtyard, and the creative multi-room floor plans found here. As evidence of its deficiencies, the applicant notes the complex's extraordinary vacancy rate, but as Marjorie detailed very vividly, this vacancy rate is in large measure self-created and would not be expected to trouble newly renovated buildings in this location with even the most rudimentary rental efforts. Time and again, the applicant struggles to identify how this complex is saddled with unique detriments that reduce its profitability, whose only solution is wholesale demolition. But as a New Yorker and an architect involved in real estate, I cannot agree with that analysis. These apartments will rent in a minute for a higher rent than many of their neighbors, due in large measure to the visionary design of its original creators. Destroying the First Avenue estate would be a significant blow against affordable housing, trading its 190 relatively affordable, humanely designed units for yet more upscale, market-rate condos or high-end developments. Maintaining this landmark, which I believe the record shows is both feasible and profitable, allows for the continued habitation of one of our city's most optimistic, altruistic efforts, its commitment to housing diversity and housing equity, a commitment reconfirmed by its citizens last year and spearheaded by the new administration only weeks ago. By preserving this development, this commission proudly contributes to that promise.
Thank you, Michael. Diana?
Thank you. I want to say first, I think I do agree with the comments of my the other commissioners who have spoken so far. And I want to point out, I guess, that this application really concerns a very important set of buildings. They were built between 1898 and 1915, this block. It's one of the 2 full block light court model tenements in the United States, the oldest extent project of the largest and most successful of the privately financed limited dividend companies that attempted and succeeded in developing model affordable housing for the working poor. And I think, as other commissioners have stated, it's very important to consider that in terms of the preservation of this group. The applicant has applied to demolish the subject buildings on the grounds that they were incapable of earning a reasonable return, stating that it intends to demolish the buildings and construct a new building on the site. I really cannot support this application for hardship, and principally because the evidence presented does not substantiate that these apartments are not capable of being rented or that they are not able to generate a reasonable rent. Moreover, it has not been demonstrated that these vacant apartments will not be profitable if renovated. In addition, I believe that there are potential other sources of income for the property that the applicant has not explored. In the matter of vacancy, according to the testimony and documents filed by the owner, at the time of designation there were 53 vacant apartments. Since designation, the owner has continued its policy of not re-renting apartments as they became vacant. At the time the hardship application was filed, 107 apartments were vacant, and there are currently 110 vacant apartments. In this case, because the owner wanted to demolish the subject buildings, it appears that they intentionally did not re-rent apartments as they became vacant. At the time of designation, for anyone seeking apartments in Manhattan, it beggars belief that these continued to be vacant, and the number of vacancies doubled. The vacancy rate for the Upper East Side averaged approximately 1.5% over the 5-year period from 2007 to 11, yet Stahl's vacancy rate in the other buildings exceeds 20%. The fact that these apartments are walk-ups or small is not something that deters those who right now are renting apartments all over New York City. It is also not demonstrated that the condition and layouts of vacant apartments are in any substantive way inferior to the other buildings, that the overall condition of the common areas in the other buildings is materially different from the conditions of the subject buildings, or that they are much less convenient to public transportation. And while some apartments in the other buildings are larger than the average buildings in the landmark building, many apartments in the other buildings are of similar size to apartments in the subject buildings or even smaller. Moreover, the applicant presented no compelling evidence that reasonable efforts were made to advertise the availability of these apartments. Stahl maintains an on-site rental office but does not advertise vacancies, keep records of how many people have inquired, nor does it maintain a record of applications for apartments. The owner has not advertised apartments in other media such as social media or newspapers, or listed it with multiple brokers. And the online broker, Greenthal, merely lists the phone number of the on-site rental office. It does not provide floor plans, virtual tours, or other information on apartments in the other buildings, nor does it say whether there are any vacancies. For anyone who's looked for vacancies in New York City, obviously you expect to find these assists in order to establish the availability of the apartments in question, and whether they are available, and what the condition of them is, and what the opportunity is that exists, and so on. And this just isn't outlined by the owner. This leads me to the conclusion that the decision by Stahl to continue its policy of not renting apartments vacated after resignation was a conscious business decision and a voluntary assumption of risk, and that any costs associated with renovating the 44 apartments vacated after redesignation are a self-imposed hardship. Therefore, only the renovation costs for the 53 apartments should be included in the analysis. in the area of additional income, the owner claims there is no opportunity for additional income from the subject property, such as providing storage or laundry facilities, although the laundry facilities are available in other comparable buildings in the complex. And storage, obviously, just a week or so ago in globestreet.com, they were talking about the opportunity that storage offers for real estate investment groups. And I just find it very surprising that there is no opportunity for storage or laundry facilities being additional income for these properties and an amenity. Nor have they explored leasing the roofs to cell phone companies. And finally, the owner has never really tried to sell its development rights and stated there is no site to which it could sell its development rights. I do not find that credible. In the area of the income level that might be anticipated, in order to estimate what income the subject buildings could generate if operated in a reasonably efficient and prudent manner, the applicant provided different development scenarios to estimate how much it would cost to renovate the vacant apartments and how much renovated apartments could rent for. After considering all of the testimony and information that was provided, it appears that moderately renovated apartments could command rents of at least $35 per leasable square foot and likely generate rents of at least $40 per square foot, if not more, while even those renovated to a minimum habitability level could rent for at least $869 a month, or $28 per square leasable foot, which is the current average current rent for occupied buildings in the subject buildings. According to the owner, the mean average of occupied apartments is approximately $840 a month, and the median last listed rent for vacant apartments approximately $857. It was not demonstrated that these rental levels were not possible for the currently vacant apartments, even with no or moderate renovation. Based on all the information and testimony provided, I find the applicant has not demonstrated that the subject properties, if operated in a reasonably efficient and prudent manner, could not generate a net return of 6% of the post-renovation assessed value of the subject properties. And I therefore cannot support this hardship application.
Thank you, Diana. Fred Bland, please.
You know, I feel I'm a reasonably well-educated man. I'm a licensed architect. I'm a certified planner, 8 years of graduate and postgraduate education, as well as completing 2 years of coursework at NYU's Real Estate Institute. Yet also, I have at home in my study a tall stack of position papers, testimony, counter-testimony, expert witness testimony, and counter-testimony, overflowing with facts and figures. This way of calculating assessed valuation, that way of calculating assessed valuation, this percentage for soft costs, that percentage for calculating soft costs, and so on. The mind boggles. At least my mind boggles. All we need to do is one simple bit of long division. Divide a numerator by a denominator and have a resultant that is less than 6%. But the disparity at arriving at what each of those two numbers is what constitutes the bulk of those documents piled high in my study. So even with my graduate level education in architecture, planning, and real estate, I have trouble parsing all the various facts and figures. So I will leave it to my other commissioners to comment, and they have beautifully already in detail, on the veracity of those facts and figures, methodologies of calculations, and the like. Rather, I will take a more general approach, an approach which my 42 years of architectural and planning practice in my firm has perhaps uniquely prepared me for. My firm was founded in the late 1960s with a pro-Jane Jacobs, anti-Robert Moses vision of urbanism. We believed in conserving the city's fabric wherever possible, working with many local, state, and national housing preservation programs, for-profit and non-for-profit developers, we have been the architects for literally thousands of rehabilitated tenement housing units across the city. We believed, and I love Marjorie's testimony in the same way. We were doing the same thing at the same time, I think. We believed in this approach for two essential and perhaps opposite reasons or rationales. One, we preserved streetscapes and kept neighborhoods and their residents intact, perhaps a social goal. Two, it made simple economic sense, as it was less expensive to keep and renovate than to demolish and build anew. Clearly an economic goal which fosters affordable housing. This approach has guided our practice and me for 42 years, and it is no less true now than it was when we started out nearly 2 generations ago. So from that perspective, let me offer 6 random thoughts about the case which the applicant is making. 1, although the applicant is preparing its case on the basis of only 2 lots on block 1450, or 1 lot on block 1459, I cannot separate that lot from their buildings and their buildings from the entire block, which was built as a unified whole of 13 light court model tenement buildings, unique in the nation. Therefore, they must be thought of and analyzed, in my judgment, for any hardship as one block, not piecemeal. Number 2, small dwelling units, rather than a burden, offer a distinct market advantage in an important niche of the New York City's residential real estate market. Indeed, our recent mayor recognized this and sponsored a widely acclaimed design competition for micro units, which were even smaller than these that we're considering today. The lack of an elevator, like thousands of other buildings in this city, certainly does not make them unrentable. Number 3, it is hard for me to believe that in the highly desirable Upper East Side there can be a true hardship regarding housing projects, unless it is a self-inflicted one, which I believe this case to be. A vacancy rate of over 20% is self-imposed warehousing. Number 4, I cannot believe that located across the street from one of the world's great research universities, filled with budding Nobel Prize winners, there is not a thriving market as micro unit and dormitory rooms for students and staff. 5, I find it hard to believe that there is no value whatsoever to the excess development rights on block 1459, at least some of which could be sold using section 7479 to underwrite at least a portion of the renovation costs. 6th, finally, for a hardship application to be successful, the owner must show that it seeks in good faith to demolish such improvement immediately for the purpose of constructing on the site a new building or income-producing facility. In this case, if this case were successful and the LPC were presented with an application for the design of a new building on Lot 22, I find it hard to believe I could ever find a new building to be appropriate unless it maintained the general height and mass of the historic buildings to which it would be adjacent and on the same block. Therefore, for me, this is a sad and cynical case of a self-inflicted hardship in order to demolish a portion of a nationally important historic complex and affordable housing units with it to be replaced by a new tower. I don't think the case for hardship has been made.
Thank you, Fred. Michael Devonshire.
If I may briefly first thank the staff at the LPC for an amazing amount of research and work in developing the resolution. And then I would say that, in fact, I support the resolution that has been established by the staff. First and foremost, I have to draw only on the expertise that I have developed over my 35-year career, and it has not so much to do with real estate value or assessed value or establishing value of apartments as it has to do with essentially the process of renovation. And in as much as that is the area that I work in, those are the issues that I essentially have to address. I would make one aside here that when I told one of my clients who owns a gazillion six-story walk-up buildings in the West Village, the amount that was purported to be the amount that they could get for the apartments in this building once they were renovated, it took me about 5 minutes to get him off the floor from his laughing, because most of his go from between $2,000 and $3,000 a month in six-story walk-ups. That said, in this situation, again, this is the Landmarks Preservation Commission, and we are the advocates for historic sites and historic resources around the city. Thus, in my mind, it becomes the effort on the part of the applicant to satisfy this commission and provide the burden of proof that an application such as this is appropriate. And in my mind, this one is not. As I said, the assessed value of the buildings is something that go back and forth ad infinitum, depending upon the point of view of the arguers. In this particular case, for me, what the issues have been are these. One, a lack of consistent and logical cost information provided throughout this process by the applicant. A pronounced lack of accuracy with regard to the construction approach and the project costs, which I find to be extraordinarily overvalued. A lack of inclusion of correct information with regard to the transfer of development rights and additional income possibilities with these buildings, and unnecessarily high soft costs assigned to the processes that they intend to go through. Thus, ultimately, and you know, I really do want to be brief here, I find that there is a consistent undervaluing of the apartments and an overvaluing of the cost, and thus I cannot support the demolition or the hardship.
Thank you, Michael. Roberta, Washington?
The owner claims that the apartments are so substantial that even after renovation, they're not expected to generate a 6% return. Much of my professional experience is in the renovation of apartments very similar to these apartments, in size, without elevators, and not always near a subway. But we had an opportunity to visit the apartments that are being discussed here, and I could see that physically they weren't very different. And I know that from experience with these apartments, that renovation, especially with the location, like the location for these buildings with these apartments, that it's possible to rent them for reasonable rents and even profitable rents. I believe that the owner has created hardship conditions for itself by warehousing available apartments and not making an earnest attempt to rent or generate income in other ways, as has been discussed here. The owners' apartments did not successfully show how the subject apartments should be considered, or why they should be considered substantially different from other apartments that they owned. its other buildings, and why the rental possibilities for that building, these two buildings, should be considered less than that of the other buildings. I believe that overall, the owner did not prove that they were incapable of obtaining a reasonable return from the subject buildings, and also that the buildings could only be profitable if they were demolished. The projected cost of $600 a month for rental was, of course, ridiculous, and I think that there was no earnest attempt to look at what could reasonably be generated under any of the scenarios that were presented. Overall, I think that demolition for these buildings are not an option, that the request for consideration as a hardship case was not actually proven, and that there are yet many years of life in these apartments, life that could clearly render a return of more than 6% for its owners.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for superb discussion, and I think the discussion and the length to which it's gone is appropriate, important, and underlying the importance, and it's warranted by the importance of the matter that's before us. I think it all leads to the inescapable conclusion that there is that the burden has not been met to prove a hardship, and with that, and I take we are, as Michael Devonshire pointed out, this is the Landmarks Preservation Commission. Our job is preservation of historic resources in the city of New York, but we are also mindful and protective of the due process rights of those who own those properties in this city, the people that come before us for not only for this hardship matter, which, as I said, is rare, but it is especially important in those cases because they tend to turn on important economic factors. In fact, that's the basis for the hardship, that we treat it with the kind of care and thoroughness that I believe has been done here, and fairness. So with that, I would take the motion myself to deny this hardship application. I recommend denial of the application to demolish 429 East 64th Street and 430 East 65th Street on grounds that they cannot make a reasonable return as defined by the Landmarks Law, Section 25309, finding, one, that under a variety of scenarios to renovate and rent 97 vacant apartments using a number of different assumptions, the improvement parcel appears capable of earning a net return equal to or in excess of the 6% of the assessed value of the improvement parcel in the test year 2009. Two, that this finding does not include potential revenue from additional sources such as building storage facilities in the basement or renting the roofs to cell phone companies. Three, that this finding does not include the potential revenue from transferring or otherwise selling the considerable excess development rights on the improvement panel. And that for these reasons, as set forth in the resolution dated May 20, 2014, and with reference to the discussion here today, the applicant has not established to the satisfaction of this commission that the improvement parcel, whether that is defined as all of Block 1459 or only Lot 22, is not capable of earning a reasonable return. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? No opposed. That's carried. Thank you. Break. Okay, we'll break.